Toyota owners are about to get really uncomfortable. Because I sat down and ran the numbers, real numbers, 5-year cost of ownership data, across every single Japanese automotive brand you can buy in America right now. And when you stack them up honestly, the results shattered what I thought I knew. Brands I assumed were budget-friendly turned out to be money pits. And one brand that most people write off completely, it landed way higher than anyone would guess. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm ranking every Japanese brand from the most expensive to own, all the way down to the cheapest. And I'm not just talking about the purchase price. I'm talking about the real cost. Depreciation, insurance, maintenance, repairs, fuel, everything that actually comes out of your wallet over 5 years. Because of the sticker price, that's maybe 40% of what a car actually costs you. And look, some of these are going to confirm what you already believe. But at least 2 or 3 of these rankings are going to genuinely shock you. So let's get into it. Before I rank anything, you need to understand how this works. Because most people think cost of ownership means how much it cost to fix. That's a fraction of the picture. True cost of ownership has 5 major components. Depreciation, how much value the car loses. That's the biggest one. And almost nobody factors it in when they're buying. Insurance, what you're paying annually just to legally drive it. Maintenance, the scheduled stuff, oil changes, brake pads, tires, fluid flushes. Repairs, the unscheduled stuff, the things that break. And fuel, what you're spending at the pump over 60,000 miles. When you add all 5 of those together across a 5-year ownership period, you get a number that looks nothing like the sticker price. A car with a $32,000 MSRP might cost you $48,000 to own over 5 years. A car with a $28,000 MSRP might only cost you $36,000. The cheaper car to buy is sometimes the more expensive car to own. That distinction is everything. And it's the reason this ranking exists. Let's start at the bottom. The most expensive Japanese brands to own. Infiniti. And honestly, this shouldn't surprise anyone who's owned one past the warranty period. Infiniti's problem isn't that they make bad cars. The VR30 twin-turbo engine is genuinely impressive. The issue is a brutal combination of heavy depreciation and expensive repairs. An Infiniti Q50 loses roughly 45 to 50% of its value in the first 5 years. That's thousands of dollars just evaporating. And when something goes wrong, and with the older models especially things do go wrong, you're paying near luxury repair costs without the brand equity that holds value. Insurance runs higher than you'd expect too, partly because of theft rates on certain models. The 5-year cost of ownership on a mid-trim Infiniti sedan runs somewhere in the neighborhood of $45,000 to $50,000 when you factor everything in, for a car that started around $42,000. Think about that math for a second. Mitsubishi. Now this one's going to seem counterintuitive. Mitsubishi is supposed to be the budget brand, right? Cheap to buy, cheap to own. Here's the thing. Cheap to buy and cheap to own are completely different statements. Mitsubishi vehicles depreciate aggressively. An Outlander or Eclipse Cross loses value fast because demand on the used market is weak, so that low entry price? You're paying for it on the back end when you go to sell or trade in. Maintenance costs are actually reasonable, I'll give them that. But the fuel economy on several of their models is mediocre for the segment, and insurance costs sit in a weird middle ground where you're not getting the savings you'd expect from a budget brand. Parts availability can also be a factor depending on where you live. Total 5-year cost on a Mitsubishi often lands in a range. That makes you wonder why you didn't just spend a little more upfront on something that holds its value. Now we move into the middle tier, and this is where things get interesting. Because these brands aren't bad, they're just not as cheap as people assume. Nissan. And look, I know, Nissan has a complicated reputation right now, but strictly on cost of ownership numbers, they land squarely in the middle. The Altima, Rogue, Sentra. These are high-volume vehicles with decent parts availability, which keeps repair and maintenance costs manageable. Where Nissan bleeds is depreciation. Not as badly as Infiniti or Mitsubishi, but worse than the top tier. And the CVT transmission question still looms over everything. Nissan's improved their CVT reliability significantly in recent years, but the reputation still drags resale values down, which increases your total cost even if the transmission itself never gives you trouble. Insurance on most Nissan models is reasonable. Fuel economy is competitive. But that depreciation curve means your 5-year total sits in a middle bracket that doesn't wow anybody. Subaru. Here's where I'm going to upset some people. Subaru has an incredibly loyal fan base, and for good reason. The all-wheel drive system, the Boxer engine, the safety ratings. But cost of ownership, it's firmly mid-tier. Subaru's maintenance costs run slightly higher than the segment average because of that Boxer engine layout. Certain jobs that are straightforward on an inline-4 become more labor-intensive on a horizontally opposed engine. Spark plug changes, for instance. Head gaskets on older models were a notorious issue. That's improved, but it shaped the cost profile. Insurance is moderate. Fuel economy on the non-turbo models is decent, but not exceptional, partly because AWD adds drivetrain losses. Where Subaru does well is resale value. Subarus hold their value stubbornly, especially in markets with harsh winters. That depreciation advantage pulls their total cost of ownership down, but it's not enough to push them into the top tier. They land solidly in the middle, a fair deal, not a steal. Acura. As Honda's luxury arm, you'd expect ownership costs to mirror Honda's reputation, and partially they do. Mechanical reliability is strong, parts share a lot of DNA with Honda. But you're paying luxury tier insurance premiums, and depreciation is steeper than Honda because the luxury market is more competitive. The Integra and TLX lose value faster than a Civic or Accord, even though the underlying engineering is closely related. Maintenance is slightly pricier because Acura dealers charge more for labor, and some Acura-specific components don't benefit from Honda's massive parts economy. It's not dramatic, but over 5 years it adds up. Acura lands in the upper middle, better than Nissan, roughly even with Subaru, but not quite touching the top. Now here's where this ranking gets fun, because there's one brand that consistently outperforms expectations in cost of ownership, Data, and it's the one most car enthusiasts overlook. Mazda. I know. Mazda doesn't get the hype that Toyota and Honda do. It's the brand people say, oh yeah, Mazda makes nice cars, and then buy a Civic anyway. But when you actually crunch the 5-year numbers, Mazda is remarkable. Here's why. Depreciation on Mazda vehicles is surprisingly gentle. The CX-5, Mazda 3, and CX-50 hold value well. Not Toyota well, but significantly better than Nissan, Mitsubishi, or Subaru. Maintenance costs are low. These are naturally aspirated Skyactiv engines with straightforward engineering. No turbo to worry about, no CVT to question. Timing chains instead of belts on most models. Fuel economy is competitive. The Mazda 3 and CX-30 are genuinely efficient. Insurance premiums on Mazdas tend to be lower than segment. Averages because of strong safety ratings and lower claim frequency. And repairs? When things do need fixing, parts are reasonable and widely available. The 5-year total cost of ownership on a Mazda CX-5 comes in thousands below a comparably equipped RAV4 in several analyses. Thousands. And nobody talks about this. People walk right past the Mazda dealership to go pay more over 5 years for a car with a different badge. Now there are trade-offs. Mazda's dealer network is smaller, so service convenience can be a factor depending on your area. Infotainment is love it or hate it, and the interior space in Mazda sedans is tighter than competitors. But purely on cost of ownership, Mazda punches way above its weight class. Alright, top of the ranking, and these two aren't going to surprise you in terms of which brands they are, but the gap between them and everyone else might. Honda. Honda's 5-year cost of ownership profile is excellent, and it comes down to a combination of factors working together. Depreciation is moderate. Civics and CR-Vs hold value well, especially in high-demand trims. Maintenance costs are among the lowest in the industry, because Honda designs for serviceability and uses reliable, well-proven powertrains. The 1.5-liter turbo and 2.0-liter naturally aspirated engines have massive service knowledge bases. Parts are everywhere and cheap. Insurance is reasonable across the lineup. Fuel economy is strong. the Civic and Accord, are consistently among the most efficient in their segments. And repairs? Honda's long-term reliability means fewer unscheduled shop visits, which keeps that repair column low. The 5-year ownership cost on a Honda Civic sits in a range that makes it one of the most financially sensible vehicles you can buy in America. The CR-V and Accord tell similar stories. Honda earned its reputation, and the data backs it up. But here's the thing, Honda isn't number one. And that brings us to the uncomfortable conversation, Toyota and Lexus. I'm grouping them because they share a fundamental ownership cost advantage that separates them from everyone else. And it's one word: depreciation. Toyota's depreciation curve is the flattest in the Japanese automotive space. A Camry, a RAV4, a Tacoma. These vehicles retain value at a level that borders on irrational. A 3-year-old Tacoma can sell for 85% of its original MSRP in some markets. That's not a truck, that's an investment. And that depreciation advantage is so powerful that it single-handedly drags Toyota's total cost of ownership below Honda's, even though Honda's maintenance and repair costs are comparably low. When you're losing less value just by owning the vehicle, the total equation shifts dramatically. Lexus follows the same pattern. An RX or ES holds value better than virtually any luxury competitor, including Acura. And because Lexus shares Toyota's engineering, mechanical reliability, and maintenance, costs stay low, even as you move into the luxury tier. You're getting luxury comfort with near mainstream ownership costs. That's a combination nobody else offers. So why did I say Toyota owners would be uncomfortable? Because here's the hidden truth in this data. Toyota's total cost of ownership advantage comes almost entirely from depreciation and resale value. When you isolate just maintenance and repairs, the stuff that actually breaks and needs fixing, Toyota and Honda are nearly identical. And in some model comparisons, Honda is slightly cheaper to maintain. The reason Toyota wins the total cost of ownership ranking isn't that they're dramatically more reliable or cheaper to fix. It's that the market believes they are. And that belief drives resale values up, which drives your depreciation cost down. Toyota's ownership advantage is partly a self-fulfilling reputation loop. Does that make Toyota a bad choice? Absolutely not. The result is the same, regardless of the reason. You lose less money owning a Toyota, but it's worth understanding that you're paying for that reputation in the form of higher purchase prices and lower negotiability at the dealership. Toyota knows their resale values are a selling point, and they price accordingly. That's the hidden truth. Toyota wins the cost of ownership race, but the margin is thinner than most people realize, and the reason is more about market perception than mechanical superiority. Let me zoom out for a second, because there's a bigger lesson in all of this. Depreciation is the single largest cost of owning any car. Not repairs, not fuel, not insurance. Depreciation. On an average new car, depreciation accounts for roughly 40 to 50% of total 5-year ownership costs. Think about that. All the oil changes, tire rotations, brake jobs, gas fill-ups, insurance payments, all of that combined is often less than the invisible cost of your car just sitting in the driveway losing value. And here's what makes depreciation tricky. You don't feel it. Nobody sends you a bill. It doesn't show up on your credit card statement. It's a silent cost that only reveals itself when you go to sell or trade in. That's why people obsess over gas prices and ignore depreciation. One is visible at every street corner, and the other hides in the background until it punches you in the stomach at the dealership. The brands at the top of this ranking, Toyota, Lexus, Honda, Mazda, they all have one thing in common. They depreciate less aggressively than the brands at the bottom. And that single factor reshuffles the entire ranking more than any other variable. So if you take one thing from this video, let it be this. When you're comparing cars, don't just compare sticker prices. Don't just compare MPG ratings or warranty lengths. Look up the projected 5-year depreciation on both vehicles. That number will tell you more about what a car actually costs than almost anything else. So here's the final ranking, bottom to top. Infiniti and Mitsubishi at the bottom, expensive to own for different reasons, but expensive either way. Nissan, Subaru, and Acura in the middle, solid but. carrying hidden costs that keep them from the top. Mazda as the surprise performer that deserves way more attention than it gets. Honda near the top with an incredibly balanced cost profile. And Toyota and Lexus at the very top, driven primarily by their unmatched resale values. But remember, these are averages across model lineups. A specific Subaru model might beat a specific Toyota model. A particular Mazda trim might be the cheapest vehicle in its entire segment to own. The ranking gives you the big picture, but your specific situation, where you live, how many miles you drive, what your insurance profile looks like, that's going to shift these numbers for you personally. The real takeaway isn't to buy a Toyota. The real takeaway is to look beyond the sticker price. Factor in every dollar that's going to leave your wallet over the next 5 years. When you do that math, the right car becomes obvious. And it might not be the one you expected. I'm planning to go deeper on a couple of these brands, specifically a full breakdown of Mazda versus Honda cost of ownership model by model, because that comparison is way closer than most people think. If that sounds useful to you, subscribe so you catch it when it drops. And honestly, I'm curious. Which ranking on this list surprised you the most? Was it Mazda landing that high? Mitsubishi landing that low? Toyota's actual reason for being number one? Drop it in the comments. I read through those because they genuinely shape what I cover next. Alright, go run the numbers on your car. You might be surprised at what you find.